If you've been here for the study, you know last week that we saw where pride and arrogance and the rejection of God led to the fall of a king. But not only just the king, but of his entire kingdom. Great Babylon, the city that could not fail, the city that could not be conquered, a city that boasted 300 high-foot walls, a river moat that ran between two sets of walls, 20 years of provisions put away to where they never were subject to a long-term siege, yet the city fell in an instant. Oh, it didn't fall to the hands of man, but it fell rather to the finger of God. Because of all the safeguards that Babylon had put into place, because of their proposed power and greatness and invulnerability to any type of attack, they had lacked any reverence for the one true and living God. A God that had allowed Babylon's greatness, a greatness that was designed to be the instrument by which his people would be chastened. But while doing so, God had also established a time when this great Babylon would end. And so we see the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, taking and partying it up and having this incredible fiasco going on while the Medes and the Persians are outside, with him partying and drinking from the vessels brought from the temple in Jerusalem, mocking God, only to find that in the middle of it, God would write on the wall. What would he write? Well, meeny, meeny, tekel, upharsin. Oh, we described it last week. We went by it in detail. Simply put, Belshazzar, your number's up. You've been weighed. You've been found to be a lightweight. You are no longer going to be able to hold this kingdom. We also saw that this fall was not a secret, that it wasn't something that should have caught anybody by surprise. Through a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, Daniel had told about two lesser rulers that would come after him and foretold about how there was going to be subsequent kingdoms. The prophet Jeremiah, 60 years before, had told specifically that it would happen on Belshazzar's, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson's watch. The prophet Isaiah had foretold hundreds of years earlier that a man by the name of Cyrus would dry up the river, would conquer the city by coming through the gates and opening the gates, and thus turning the kingdom over to the Medes and the Persians. As we move into this next chapter, that's exactly what we see. The arms of silver, the Medes and the Persians, that now literally own the title, the wealth, and everything that Babylon ever was. Darius the Mede, that we'll see mentioned here, and if you're a history buff, you might know that Darius was a popular name. There was a Darius the First who was the ruler of Persia from 523 to 486, and don't confuse, if you would, that this Darius the Mede and Darius the First were the same. And the only reason that I bring that up is so that we don't confuse history and thus think somehow that the account is not accurate. The Darius that would have been placed in Babylon most likely took that name in honor of the emperor. And so it's not one and the same person, but yet at the same time, it really doesn't matter, because the history that is going to be played out is played out based solely on the sovereignty of God. So the scene, Babylon, this great city, has fallen. The Mede and the Persian armies are plundering, and they're using great force to establish their superiority. The army would have been purposely harsh. They would have made sure that there was no means by which any of those that were in the city would think to rebel. As a matter of fact, as it turned out, there was not a difference between the Babylonians and the Jews any longer. The Jews had been captive of the Babylonians, but now they were all captives. They all came into the same control under the ruler of Persia. The Jews literally, by virtue of this new regime change, had actually been elevated in their position. No longer were they the only slaves, so were their keepers, the Babylonians, now joining them in this plight. The goal of Darius, very simple. Anytime that you would take over, you need to set up a new administration. An administration, unfortunately, that very often carries with it some of those that were left over from the last administration. And so the search for those who would be loyal, the search for those who would be able to continue and maintain the right type of attitude under a new leadership created great challenges. His goal was to make Babylon into a productive and rewarding addition to the Persian Empire. And so in verse 1 of chapter 6 it says that it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give an account to him, or them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above all the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. And so the governors and the satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find no charge or fault, because he was, say it with me, faithful. Nor was there any error or fault found in him. Again, whenever there's a governmental change, whenever there's an administrative change, there needs to be the rounding up of those that are there and the determination on whether or not they're going to stay with the program. No doubt there was widespread corruption within the ranks, and Darius needed to find out who he could trust and who he couldn't. And when he looked around the kingdom, one of the things that stuck out, one of the persons that stuck out, was this Daniel. Why? Well, there was wisdom and there was integrity. It says that he had an excellent spirit. Well, I would say that the excellent spirit that Daniel possessed was that of the Holy Spirit. And within this group, Daniel became this ideal of what leadership would look like based on his previous service, but it wasn't because he served Nebuchadnezzar. It wasn't because he served Belshazzar. It wasn't because now Darius looked to set him up as maybe the head governor over the entire province. It was because Daniel's example of leadership was that his first allegiance, his first loyalty, the work that he did was as unto his God. Daniel set himself as a man of integrity, not on his means, but by means of the reflection of the God that he served. And so because his principal, if you will, boss of bosses was God himself, everyone that he served below that benefited. Everyone that he worked for was the recipient of this excellent spirit that dwelt within inside of Daniel. So the king placed 120 satraps. Satraps would be kind of, well, they're your county commissioners. They're your lower form of local governing body. And then there would have been these governors, and as soon as he placed them in their positions, all of a sudden the problem started. The problem started because those that were not Daniel realized that Daniel was a problem. One honest man in a group of thieves is a problem. Okay? More so, though, for the honest man, because the thieves will have a certain amount of, if you will, dishonorable honor amongst themselves, but they will target the honest man because they know that he will be the means by which they are not able to advance their own agendas. For this reason, it made it nearly impossible for anyone in the political scheme of things to operate honestly, but yet this was what Daniel did. And it says that they looked to find wrong. They looked to find something wrong that they could hold against him. They wanted to make him look bad. They wanted to start telling stories about him or find something that they could dig up. They looked at his books. They tried to offer him bribes. They tried to get him in compromising situations, and none of which could they do in any kind of substantial way. So they looked to the only place that they might be able to not get him to compromise, but the one place that they knew that he wouldn't. And it says in verse 5, "Then these men said, 'We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God.'" This type of conflict, especially in the workplace, should not be unexpected. It shouldn't be something that would surprise us. Let me tell you what, if you are the only Christian in your workplace, if you're not a target, they don't know you're a Christian. I mean, it's really that simple. You cannot work in that situation around other people who are not believers and be a true believer in that environment and not stand out. Now, you'll stand out because of your grace and your mercy. The grace and mercy that God gives you, you will be more patient with people. You will be among those that would be more gracious with folks. You'll show mercy to folks. But see, there's a bigger problem than that. And believe me, in a workplace full of heathens, mercy, grace is a problem. You don't fit in. The biggest problem is that you're going to bring light into the workplace. You're going to shine light by virtue of the light that is within you, by the fact that you belong to Jesus Christ, the fact that that light is within you. Just being there is going to turn the light on. And the Word tells us that the men don't like the light. That man doesn't like light because they like darkness, because they think they can hide in the darkness. And if you walk in and flip on the lights, the cockroaches aren't going to scatter. They're going to gang up because they don't like the light. And so this is what Daniel finds himself posed with, is that he now, by virtue of this excellent spirit, by this aspect of being recognized by the king, and understand that can happen in your workplace. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it, when your boss recognizes you as a quality and person of integrity, until it doesn't work for them, until the complaints start coming in, until your coworkers say, hey, stop working so hard, you're making us look bad. Stop showing up early and staying late. Do like we do, come in late and leave early. There's a problem here. Sure, I was 15 minutes late back coming from lunch, but you shouldn't say anything. You shouldn't have a problem with that. Everybody does that. Why don't you do that? And while your boss may think you're great and wonderful, you will go against the tide. And this is exactly where Daniel finds himself. So these governors and these satraps thronged before the king, and they said thus to the king, King Darius, live forever. All of the governors of the kingdom, the administrators, the satraps, the counselors, the advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree, that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. So the plot here is very, very easy. The plot is very simple. Flatter the king, play on his pride, in order for them to further their plan. Now, it says that they all went to the king. Well, the problem is that 120 of them may have gone to the king, but they forgot to tell Daniel. Daniel is the one who was potentially the head over this. It's almost kind of interesting to think that the king wouldn't have looked around and said, where's my number one guy in this process? But you see, the fact of the matter is people that are in charge very likely and very often like to be self-promoted. They like the idea of being identified. Can you imagine as the king or as the leader having your group come to you underneath and say, hey, we're going to worship only you for the next 30 days? Oh, shucks, guys. You don't need to do that. What are you going to do? Yeah, you're the only one that's going to receive worship. They knew that this was going to feed the king's ego, that it was going to feed his pride, that he was going to accept this, and it fit right into his plans because he knew that he needed to unify the kingdom. He knew that he needed to bring people together. What better way than to take and be able to identify everyone that was for him and even more so those that were against him. And then there was an expedient means by which of dealing with those that were against him. Very simply, you just feed them to the lions. No problem. The way they presented it made it look like it was unanimous, but obviously it wasn't. But there's an interesting element here from a historical standpoint that is sometimes overlooked, but it's this aspect of saying that it was in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians. And you see, Daniel had told Nebuchadnezzar that the kingdom that will come after you will be a lesser kingdom. You remember he talked about how King Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, that he was the pinnacle of the image. Why? Because he was truly independently large and in charge. King Nebuchadnezzar could make a determination and change his mind 5 times before they wrote it down, and he had the liberty and the freedom and the power to do that. He was totally autonomous. He had nobody else that he had to answer to, but not so for the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians had adopted this philosophy that their kings could not err, that they could not be wrong. And if they were ever to make a decree and go back on it, it would prove that they had failed, and by being a failure, they were unfit to rule. And so the king's decisions were not allowed to be overturned. He was unable to even go back on what he said because it would have shown weakness and proved that he was unfit to be the king. So according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, when it went in writing, it was in stone. And by signing the decree, he signed Daniel's death warrant. Why? Well, we'll see in a minute. Now, when Daniel knew that this writing was signed, he went home. And he went to his upper room, and he closed his windows and pulled his curtains tight, and secretly knelt down on his knee. No, wait a minute. That's the wrong version. Let's back up. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times a day, and he prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. And these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? And the king answered and said, This is true. I signed it according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. I don't think they could wait to say it, but they answered before the king and said, Well, Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but he makes petition 3 times a day. Now, I find it interesting that after all this time, after now the Babylonians being overtaken by the Medes and the Persians, that they would still hold up and identify specifically that Daniel is one of the captives from Judah. It was an identifier. It wasn't, one of the other governors, one of the other guys. You would think that by now there would have been enough assimilation between the people groups that this wouldn't have been such a big issue, especially since the Babylonians can claim no position. But rather than it being a dig, I believe what it demonstrates is I believe that it demonstrates that Daniel had not compromised, had not become a Babylonian. I believe that what it demonstrates is that Daniel had kept his identity in the God in which he trusted, in the God in which he believed, to the point that it was so obvious that while maybe everybody else has assimilated, everybody else looks like everybody else, everybody's doing the same thing, everybody's doing it, not Daniel. Daniel was still of the captives of Judah. His mindset was that he wasn't there permanently. He was not there of his own free will. He served obediently, as unto the Lord. But he wasn't there, and it's like, well, this is where you're at now. When in Babylon, do as the Babylonians. Yep, here we go. It's my life now. No. He was still separated out. And guys, I got to tell you what, from time to time, we're going to run into the same situation. We're going to run into the same situation where even though we might have setbacks in our faith, even though we might have a difficulty in standing firm in the things of the Lord, the reality is that there's going to be opportunity for us to be able to demonstrate that we are still separate from the world. Going back to the example of the workplace, if the people in your workplace don't know you're a Christian, something's wrong. No, that doesn't mean that you run through the hallways with a 27-pound King James Bible and whack people upside the head. It isn't that. But there should be that excellent spirit. There should be that integrity. There should be that aspect of that grace and that mercy that flows to us, flowing from us to those around us. And even though there may be rebellion and even though people may not appreciate it, the reality is that people should be able to look at us and go, there's something different about that guy. There's something different. I mean, I thought it was hilarious. You know, I worked for the state for many, many years, retired from the state, and was a pastor simultaneously through the whole process. And people knew that I was a pastor, and for some that was an okay thing. For others it was a great thing, and for others they despised me. And it was just part of how the world works. But it would be funny because I'd walk into the break room and all of a sudden, I used to have people find me and tell me that they needed to apologize for a joke they told when I wasn't even in the room. I'm like, really? You don't need to do that. You really don't. You understand? I'll forgive you, but you need to go to the Lord with that because He may not unless you ask Him. This is always going to be the situation. And guys, we have an opportunity to be able to stand in this world, not assimilating and becoming a part of the world, but doing so in such a way that our identity is in Christ. And may it be that when people would look at our lives, they would say, you know what, I like him, I don't like him, I hate him completely, loathe him entirely, but the reality is that he's a person or she's a person of integrity. She believes what she believes, and she stands and he stands on those principles. Amen? And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself. And he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king, and they said, O king, that is the law of the Medes and Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. I mean, these guys are pretty brazen. I mean, not only did they set this plan in place, not only did they do it by means of deception, they have an ulterior motive, but the king isn't acting quickly enough for their purposes. And so they wind up going to the king and reminding the king, now remember, they're slaves. You got to do this because it's the law. The law says you have to do this. And even though he's looking for a way out, he realizes there is none. And it says, so the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel, and they cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, He will deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel may not be changed. I love the fact that it said a little earlier on, Daniel knew the paper had been signed. Daniel knew that the decree was in place, and then he went home and prayed. You know, he could have simply changed his habit. 30 days. 30 days. He could have gone home, closed his curtains, knew that it was a setup, because he had to have known it was a setup. He had to know that this was something that was pointed directly at him, and yet he chose not to. Because for 80 years prior to this, he had walked with the Lord and he had not changed his pattern. And I think it was this dedication to prayer that made Daniel the man that he was. Daniel was hard set that he was going to stop, drop, and pray 3 times a day. Now, I am not establishing some higher, superior spirituality authority here when it comes to what I'm going to suggest, because I'm going to suggest that even 3 times a day is probably not enough to pray. And I don't think that this is necessarily the only times that Daniel prayed. I believe that these are the times that Daniel specifically set out that he was going to purpose in his heart to communicate with God. And so in the morning, what a great way to start out the day. Good morning, Lord. Rather than good Lord, it's morning. I think we should start out each day thanking the Lord that we got out of bed, that we're able to breathe, that we have an opportunity to be able to do something. And I think in that thanks and in that petition that we would go to Him, that we need to tell Him, Lord, and by the way, if you call today, I'm going to answer. And when I answer, the answer is always going to be yes to whatever you ask me. I'm your man. Lord, thank you for the day that you've given me. And then check back around noon, right? When you're really exhausted. When the day is already only just half over, but you're 3/4 of the way done. And you go to the Lord and you say, Lord, again, not help. Start with thank you. Lord, thank you for getting me this far, but if you don't show up, I don't know if the rest of the day is going to go as good as this has. And by the way, I need some advice on this situation. I need to know how to handle this. Lord, I need you to settle my heart in this area, because this is something that has happened that has caused me to lose my focus. And Lord, by the way, thank you. Thank you for being with me today. I know you're with me. I know you're here. And at the end of the day, the same thing. Lord, thank you Thank you for getting me through another day. And understand, on your knees, upright, laying down, sideways, it doesn't matter. I don't think that praying on your knees is going to make you a better Christian. It might be what works for you. It might be how you need to focus on the things of the Lord. And I'm not going to say again that there's a prescription or a prescribed method, but what I'm going to say is that we need to be praying. And when we go to the Lord in that evening time, we need to not only thank Him for what He's done for the day, but we need to thank Him in anticipation of talking to Him again in the morning. Being able to say, all right, Lord, thank you so much. Lord, provide me with great rest tonight. And then before you hang up, I'll talk to you in the morning. I'll talk to you in the morning. And I believe that this was one of the strongholds of Daniel's life that allowed him to be able to take and to be able to identify where and what God wanted him to do, because he never didn't pray in this way. He made it a part of who he was. It is interesting, though, that the guys that were setting him up just couldn't wait to run to the king. "Oh, king, can we remind you, you signed that petition, you signed that decree that says this." Well, guess what? Daniel couldn't wait to tell him and remind him of the law. And then it says that the king was greatly disappointed in himself. In himself! Why? Well, he knew that haste, he knew that pride, he knew that by not being wise and exercising wise oversight with this decision, that he had in fact signed a death warrant for Daniel, his most trusted advisor. Remember, Daniel was about to be set, if not set, to be the head over all of these guys. And all of a sudden, the king finds himself in this snare. He finds him in this trap. He didn't read the fine print. He signed the contract. He agreed to the terms, and in so doing, never thought far enough ahead to realize that by the acts of his decision, the haste and the pride that drove it, he now has done damage that is irreversible. And there's nothing that he can do to change it. And guys, let me tell you what, decisions made in haste or in pride almost always lead to regret. They almost always lead to harming ourselves or other. And while we may never be confronted with a decision that holds someone else's life in the balance as the king was here, remember, all of our decisions have consequences. The goal is to try to have good consequences. I mean, are we really hoping that the decision that we make advances that which is good rather than picking the worst or the less of two evils? How many of you do that? You play that game. You play the what if and the worst thing that could happen. Well, you know what the worst thing is? And there's always one more worst thing, isn't there? The more you get information on it, the more the things develop. It's like, oh, well, now there's a new worst thing. Well, I thought that was the worst thing. Oh, no, this is the worst thing that could happen. Is this the worst that could happen? No, there's another new worst thing that could happen. This means we should always approach decisions carefully. Oh, now understand, there's certain decisions that don't require a lot of forethought. If you're driving down the road and a car's in your lane, make the decision to swerve. If it's the decision between, eating at this restaurant or that restaurant, probably not life-shattering depending on the restaurant and their health rating, okay? Be careful. But I'm talking about decisions that have the ability to be able to impact our lives, decisions that have the ability to be able to impact other people's lives. We need to take and bring them in such a way that we apply a proper godly perspective to those decisions. And so often we don't. As I was preparing this message, I came across something, and based on it, I borrowed it from the internet, so I'm not going to tell you it's my work. It's something that I compiled, and there's a sheet that is actually out in the foyer that's waiting on you when you get out of here after the message. I purposed not to give it to you because it has more information than I'm going to share with you right now, and if I would have given it to you, and it's on making wise decisions, and it gives you some biblical context on how to do it. I'll talk about what those contexts are in just a second. But had I given it to you right now, you guys would have all checked out and not heard the rest of the message. But what I want to tell you is that it's extremely important that you take the time and you make sure that you grab one of these on your way out, because the principles that are contained within this short little couple of pages are very, very helpful in making good and wise and godly decisions. Takes into consideration things such as, what are the biblical principles involved in the decision that I'm making? Is there a biblical principle? Is there already something that God has said in the negative or the positive that should guide and direct the decision that I make? Because so often we'll go to God and say, God, should I do this? And He's already told us. If God has already said, don't be unequally yoked, then we don't need to ask Him if we need to go into a business with an unbeliever. Well, but He's not that bad of an unbeliever. He's not a total heathen or a pagan, he might be an atheist, but that's okay because I'll convert him. No. If God has already told us in His Word that there are things that we're not supposed to do, then we don't need to go ask Him if it's okay in this situation. I'm different, Lord, than everybody else you were writing to in your Bible. Is there a biblical principle? Next, do we have all the facts? How many of you have ever made a decision on half the facts? And then the other half come in. Time. Have you taken time to make the decision, or is the time forcing you to make a hasty decision? If it's so important, if it's so urgent, and again, car in your lane, make the decision. Don't need to close your eyes and pray about it. How many of you found yourself being told that if you don't act right now, the deal goes away? I love those situations. And I look at them and I go, and you know what? The deal will be here tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. The only one that's in a hurry to make this deal is you. Because I'm going to go home and pray about it. Drives the car guys crazy. If you buy it right now, you know what? If I buy it right now or tomorrow or 3 days from now, you'll give me the same deal and maybe a better one. What's your motives? What are the motives behind what you're doing? I mean, are your motives intended for good, or is it all about, what you get out of it? Am I going to make this decision because it's just good for me at the sake of others? Past experience. What has past experience taught you? If past experience doesn't teach you to avoid bad mistakes, then what good is it? How many of you have ever made the same mistake more than once? Okay, I'm going to teach you something here. I'm going to give you a little bit of word of advice. Try every day to make different mistakes. New mistakes. Okay? I try to make new mistakes every day. My wife tells me I'm doing really good. What's the collective counsel of other believers? Honestly. Don't go out and solicit agreement. Go out and ask for counsel. So often when we start looking for the answer that we want, we only go to the people that we think we'll get it from. We go build a consensus around and then the first one that comes up and tells us, well, that doesn't sound like the right thing to do. Well, I didn't need to talk to you anyway. I'll go find the other person. Warning signs. Don't dismiss that feeling in your gut. There's a warning sign. There's something, and this may be tied to any of the ones that are above this. It may be that biblical principle, and in the biblical principle it says, hey, don't do this. If you do this, you're going to be in trouble. It's like, well, but that doesn't apply to me. Not in this situation. I'm smarter than everybody else in the world up to this point in time. Have you considered what the possible outcomes are? What is the effect on other people? Could this decision potentially jeopardize your integrity and your witness to those that are around you? And even in conclusion on this list of 10, is there a better option? Is there something that would allow me to make a bigger impact? Is there a better decision? Is there another option that I can make that would create a better outcome for the kingdom of God? In the end, the king's decision was final. He had put Daniel in the lion's den, and there was nothing that he could do about it. It was sealed in stone. The law of the Medes and the Persians made it so. But he speaks to Daniel, and it sounds like a proclamation here, doesn't it? Oh, Daniel, your God can save. It sounds like he's making a declaration, doesn't it? I think it was a question. I think it was more of a question. I think it was more of a, Daniel, your God's got this, right? Your God can deal with this, right? You know, I really blew this, Daniel, and I'm really sorry. I really didn't want to put you into this situation, and it's my fault. My bad. You're going into the lions then. My fault. Your God can handle this, right? And there must have been something about Daniel's demeanor. There must have been something that caused the king to even ask this question, because the reality was that anyone that went into the lion's den, the outcome was certain. I mean, this is like saying, okay, we're gonna put you in the electric chair, and you'll be okay on the other side, right? And we're going to strap you to the guillotine and let the blade down, and on the other end, you're going to be okay. I mean, this wasn't one of those things that you walked away from. There had never been a precedent that anybody had ever gone in the lion's den and ever come out. They had prepared the lions specifically for this task. They were kept hungry. They were kept on the other side of a gate. And what would happen is the person would be put into the den, and then the gate would be opened, and the lions and the animals that would be used in these types of practices had been keyed that when the gate opened, they knew that food was on the other side, and they were hungry, and whatever it was, it didn't matter. They were going to eat it. They were going to eat it. So there was no question as to whether or not what the outcome of this was going to be. It says when the king left, that he was troubled. You see, kings were those that were purposely kept distracted. You know, we've all seen the movies of the medieval jester. The fool that was just to be around all the time to try to make the king laugh because the weight of the crown bared heavy on them, and they had all of these concerns and stuff, and so that they could amuse them with music or with food or with entertainment or whatever it was. And it says that he was going to have none of that this evening. And it goes on and it says, now when the king went to his palace and slept or spent the night fasting, there were no musicians who were brought before him. Also, his sleep went from him. Then the king rose very early in the morning, and he went in haste to the den of lions. And when he had come to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? The only way that the king could have thought this was even possible was because of how Daniel approached it. Stay with me for a moment. We talked about Rack, Shack, and Benny. We talked about these guys when they were thrown into the fiery furnace, that as they approached the furnace, that those that were bringing them up to the furnace burst into flames and died. And so here's these three guys, and I know what I would have done. I just stood there. Somebody else going to come push me in? It didn't say this. It says that they fell in. That they initiated themselves going in because there wasn't anybody else to push them in. What a testimony. What a witness. They had already told the king that if our God doesn't deliver us, he's already delivered us. But we won't serve your gods. Daniel must have gone in the same way. I don't think there were 3 or 4 guards dragging Daniel into the den and he's going, ah! I think he walked in. He said, all right, open the door. If God's got this, he's got it. If he don't, he's got me. And what a place. What a place. Now, what I want you to understand, Daniel wasn't a Superman. Now, we read about him in his book, and we hold him up. Oh, Daniel, I want to meet this guy, right? This guy, oh, man, this guy, he must have had just so much more going on than any of us got going on. I would beg to differ. He's just like you and me. He was just like you and me. I think part of the things that made Daniel different was, number one, is that he approached God 3 times a day in prayer and asked him what was going on morning, afternoon, and evening. I think that Daniel had an opportunity by adversity to stand strong and to build that strength and faith in the Lord because he would not compromise, whereas sometimes when we do compromise, it doesn't make it to where we get along. It makes us weak. But he was just like you and me. He had the same hang-ups that we've got. He had the same fears we had. Who in here would go, yeah, I'm going to go lickety-split, skippity-hoppity going into the lines then. Yeah, I'm ready to go. Here we go. Sign me up. I think it's funny that the king, did some very, very unkingly behavior here. First off, kings didn't get up early. That was not a kingly thing. Around my house, I'm obviously not the king. The queens and the princesses get to sleep in a little bit later, but not the king. Amen. But then it also says he ran. Kings didn't run. They didn't run anywhere. If they needed to run somewhere, they just told somebody, go run for me. How cool would that be? I need to work out. Go to the gym. But he ran, and he cried out with this voice of hope. Daniel, have you been delivered? And look at verse 21. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. Now, it'd be really easy to miss this because we've laughed about the fact that there's this constant buffing up of the king. O king, live forever. O king, live forever. I mean, it's almost kind of like, O king, yeah, I mean, come on. But it shows something in Daniel. Daniel's still the same guy that went into the den. Daniel's not going to go, yeah, I'm good. Now what you going to do? Or when the king says, come out, him saying, no, you come in. No. Daniel's integrity, his humility is intact. He is still serving God, who has just protected him throughout the course of the evening, and he's still serving this man that God has raised up, because God is the one that raises up kings and puts them down. And so he's still in this place of, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. O king, and also I have done no wrong before you. What a statement. To be found innocent before God and be innocent before man. So often judgments come and we consider someone guilty or innocent based on so little information. So little information. It wasn't too many years ago I was having a conversation with one of my kids. I won't tell you which one because I like embarrassing them. They're all three here. Could have been any one of them. I think it's because I don't remember. But they were telling me how they knew something about somebody else. Oh, you should hear what so-and-so did. And I asked them, how did you know? How do you know that? Oh, well, somebody told me that they did this. And we instantly had that conversation about somebody telling you something. One side of the story does not create knowledge. But how often do we have a tendency to grab one side of the story and create a whole knowledge string of what the events were and then start assigning motives behind it? Are you good at that? I am. I can assign all kinds of devious motives to you guys for the things that you do. And you can probably do the same thing for me, can't you? Well, I think this is what they were doing. When they said this is what they really meant. And what they must be doing is they must be doing, oh, they're just doing this. You don't do that, do you? Much. But there's more than one side to every story. How many of you in here think that there's two sides to every story? Wrong. How many of you think that there's three sides to every story? Wrong. There's four sides to every story. Four sides. Okay, you might not have heard this before, but it's true. You'll see in just a moment. First, there's the opposing sides. Those are the two. There's what he said and what he said, or he said and she said, or she said and she said. There's the opposing sides, and the Bible tells us straight out that it's a foolish counsel to take the side of one without hearing the other. Okay, and that brings in the third side of the story. You see, the third side of the story is what can be determined when an individual takes both sides of the story and assimilates it into their own mind and tries to determine what happened. That's the third side of the story. Now that I've got this side and I've got this side, I've got the side that I now have painted based on these two areas of information. But there's a fourth side. The fourth side is what God sees and what really happened. And see, that's the one that we so often overlook. We so often rush to judgment that we don't necessarily take the time to look and to realize. Daniel says, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong, and the proof of that is that God shut the mouths of the lions. But I also didn't do anything wrong against you. I didn't do anything intentionally. My heart was not a matter of trying to purpose to be disrespectful or disobedient or disregard your order. I did that which was right before the Lord. And guys, we can stand on those same things. I love the fact that it says that God didn't just shut the mouths of the lions. That would have been enough. Okay? There's been times when I've been standing in the lion's den when it's just enough for the Lord to shut their mouths. That's great. But it says that an angel of the Lord showed up. I would say this was the same angel that was walking in the fire with Rakshak and Benny. You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about Jesus Christ. I'm talking about the fact that the Lord was not only going to sustain him and honor him and let him know that he had honored the Lord and he had honored the King, but he was going to show up and stand with him and be with him. And I don't know what they talked about, but it must have been like a really cool night. I mean, could you imagine Daniel walking in? Because, again, Daniel didn't go in there and go, all right, come and get it. He would have been terrified. The outcome was sure. When you walk in and you are across the gate from hungry lions who are trained to eat and devour what's ever on the other side of the gate, and the gate slides open, meow. Really? And then all of a sudden, he's not alone. God is a God of comfort in the midst of the storm. God wants to comfort us. He wants to not only deliver us, he wants to comfort us. But the way that we're going to receive that comfort, the way that we're going to accept that, is that we have to trust him for that deliverance. The king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatsoever or whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And then the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Them, their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all of their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. You see, the lions weren't fasting. They weren't on a diet. They were hungry. There was no explanation for Daniel's survival other than the intervention of God, as proved by those who now had set a trap for Daniel to be devoured, who are now being devoured by the trap that they set. But what's interesting here and what's very telling is that there's those that would look at this and they would say, yes, but this isn't fair. Not only were they thrown in, but their kids were thrown in. What did their kids ever do? Their wives were thrown in. Now, granted, maybe that was not necessarily all wrong, but the reality is that they weren't involved in this thing. And there's those that would look at this and go, God's really unfair, isn't he? Isn't that an unfair thing of God to do, to put those guys in and throw their kids and their wives in there too? How terrible. Well, first off, God didn't do it. Darius did. Darius did. It wasn't God's plan to do that. It was Darius' plan, and it was founded in some really, really good and, well, smart principle. You see, one of the things that would happen in this particular time and age is when somebody would conquer another people, when somebody would do something, is there was this little tendency for future generations to go back and to seek revenge. And so what Darius did was very simply remove the opportunity for there to be any bloodline that would potentially come back and avenge those that he had put to death by wiping them all out. That's great historically. Principally, here's the point. What we do, the decisions that we make in the attempts to devour others, will not only devour us, but those that we love. You see, we've got to be cognizant of our decisions. This is another reason why when you get ready to leave out of here right after we're done in a few minutes is I want you to pick up one of those decision-making forms out there, one of the things where you can go through and look at the verses that support it and look at a process by which when you make a decision that you can do so on godly principles, because guys, understand, every decision we make affects somebody else. You don't think so, this is my own choice. I'm making this choice for me. Let me tell you what, you don't make it in a vacuum. Dads, if you're a father and you're in this room, There's no decision you make that's on your own that doesn't affect somebody. Moms, same way. Kids, same way. Well, let's just say everyone. I don't care if you're a hermit living under a bridge with no living relatives. If you make a decision, it'll mess somebody else's opportunity to live under that bridge with you. Everything we do and the decisions that we make affects others, and we see that so clearly played out here. The king gave a command, and they were brought. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples and nations in the language that dwell in the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel." Well, these pagan kings just don't get it, right? Well, I'm going to make a decree. Everybody start trembling and fearing. But he's got it right. He says, "For he's the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions?" And so Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So today, the takeaway, real simple. Here's what you need to take away today. Make wise decisions. Make wise decisions. Know that the decision that you make impacts and affects other people. We are going to see God walk us through many lions' dens in our lives, many storms, many opportunities for us to compromise. And yet the example that we're given is that of Daniel, who said, "No, I'm going to continue to do what the Lord has told me to do. It may cost me everything, but in the end, if it does, it costs me nothing, because I know who holds me." And guys, that's the same God that protected Daniel, that delivered Daniel, that stood with Daniel, that comforted Daniel, that stands by us and comforts us. And we can walk in that strength. Let's pray.